You know that feeling, right? You're staring at a chart that's just packed with data, and you feel completely lost. We've all been there. So today, we're going to dive into how a few key graphic design principles can turn that data chaos into a clear, compelling story.
Look, the whole point of visualizing data is to make it easier to understand. But sometimes, in this rush to show everything, we end up communicating absolutely nothing. And that's a huge problem, right? Because a confusing chart in a business report or a scientific paper, that can lead to some seriously wrong conclusions. Okay, take a look at this. This is a perfect example of what designers call chart junk. It's just this tangled web of lines and colors and numbers. Yeah, there's a ton of information in there, but the actual message, the story the data's supposed to be telling, it's completely buried. It's basically a puzzle, not a clarification. I mean, seriously, what's the story here? What's the first thing you notice? What's the main takeaway? If you can't answer that in about, say, 3 seconds, the visualization has failed. And that feeling of immediate confusion, that's the exact problem we're going to solve today. So here's the crucial point. Just plotting numbers on a graph is not enough. We have to start thinking like designers. And the fix? Well, it's all about applying some fundamental graphic design principles to guide our audience, create clarity, and make our data actually stick. So our first principle is really all about control. How do we create a visual path for our audience? How do we make sure they look exactly where we want them to look and in the right order? The answer is something called visual hierarchy. Just think of it like a tour guide for your viewer's eyes. It uses things like size, color, and placement to basically tell the brain, hey, look at this first. Okay, now look at this. And finally, here are the smaller details. It creates order out of what could be total chaos. And you know, this structure is how we read anything, not just charts. Our brains are just wired to look for the biggest, boldest thing first. That's the headline. Then the subheads kind of act as signposts, and only then do we dive into the finer details. It's a system, and it's a deliberate one for guiding understanding. And we can apply that same logic directly to a chart. First up, your title. That's your big headline. It has to be the most prominent thing on the page. Then come the axis labels. They give you that secondary context. The what and the how much. And finally, you have the tick labels. They're the fine print, super essential, but they shouldn't be competing for attention. Okay, let's move on to our next tool, and you'll see how this all builds. Typography. I mean, text is everywhere in our visualizations. Titles, labels, notes, and getting it right is absolutely critical for clarity. So you're generally going to run into 2 big font families. You've got serif fonts, the ones with the little feet on the letters, which can feel a bit more traditional, and then you have sans serif fonts, without those feet, which usually feel more modern and clean. Now, there's no single best font for data viz, but the key is to choose one with a purpose and, more than anything, be consistent. This quote from the source material really gets to the heart of it. Your choice of font, the size, the weight, these are not afterthoughts. They're just as important as the bars or the lines in your chart because they're the things that carry all the meaning and the context. And here's a fantastic, super practical tip. We often design on these big, beautiful screens where everything looks perfectly clear. But what happens when that chart ends up in a PDF or on a tiny phone screen? You should always zoom out, shrink it down, and check your work to make sure all that important text is still legible. All right, let's talk about the most powerful and probably the most misused tool in our design toolbox. Color. I mean, color can clarify and highlight like nothing else, but if you don't have a clear purpose for it, it can do a lot of damage. This right here, this is what we want to avoid at all costs. The source material calls this coloring for the sake of coloring, and it's true. Does the rainbow tell us anything new about the data? Nope, it's purely for decoration, and all it really does is create a massive amount of visual noise that totally distracts from the actual story. Now, contrast that with this. This is coloring for communication. See how in these examples, color is used sparingly? It's used to draw your eye to one specific thing, the most important data point, the outlier, the one part of the story that the creator really wants you to see first. It's targeted. It's effective. So the key rules for color are pretty simple. First, use it to support your story, not just to decorate. Second, make sure there's enough contrast so everything's easy to read. And third, and this is crucial, design for accessibility. Something like 8% of men have some form of color vision deficiency. So this isn't just a nice to have, it's essential if you want your work to be understood by everyone. Okay, so we've got the principles down. Now let's really solidify them by looking at the three most common mistakes people make, and more importantly, how you can avoid them. First up, mistake number one, just using way too many colors. Remember our rainbow chart? That's a classic example of how throwing every color in the box at a chart can actually hide the message instead of revealing it. So, keep your color palette limited and purposeful. And here's our old friend, the spaghetti chart. This is mistake number two, overcrowding. Trying to cram a dozen different data series onto a single chart is just a recipe for confusion. A lot of the time, it's way better to break the data into a few smaller, clearer charts. Let the story breathe a little. And finally, mistake number three, poor labeling. As you can see here, when your typography is a total mess with all these inconsistent font sizes and no clear hierarchy, it forces your viewer to work way too hard just to figure out what's what. Good design makes it feel effortless. So after looking at hierarchy and typography and color and everything to avoid, it all really comes down to one simple but really powerful idea. The best, most effective visualizations have two essential ingredients. Of course, you absolutely must have accurate, well-sourced data. But that data is only as good as its presentation. You also need effective, thoughtful design to actually bring that data to life and communicate its meaning. So I'll just leave you with this question. A chart isn't just a container for a bunch of numbers. It's a storytelling tool. So the next time you sit down to create one, don't just ask, how can I plot this data? Ask yourself, what's the most important story in here, and how can I use design to tell it clearly?